Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. I am so excited today to bring to you Jeff and Beth McCord. Those of you who are faithful listeners of the Wednesday with Watson podcast have proven that to me, because anytime anything comes onto this podcast as it pertains to the Enneagram, our traffic increases exponentially. And so I am honored to have both Jeff and Beth McCord on the Wednesdays with Watson podcast today. Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for being here with me on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah. Oh, we're so excited to be here and just to talk and share some commonalities together.
Well, I am grateful for both of you. As I mentioned, those of you who are tempted to scrub through the introduction, make sure you go back and listen to how we introduce them. These guys have been doing this for about 20 years, I believe 2001, 2002.
That's right.
And they know what they are doing. And we're going to talk about a new book.
Well, let's not get too far. We don't exactly know what we're doing.
We know that we don't know what we're doing.
That's right. Yes, that's the key criteria.
That's the six. That's the six.
Yeah. Yes. You got me, Amy. You got me.
That's awesome. So funny. Well, I am so grateful that you guys have taken the time, because as I mentioned, my listeners devour this, and we did take a journey in season 3 where most of my content is born out of my own desire to grow, my own desire to heal. I am a survivor, as many of my listeners know, of 35 years of trauma, ranging from childhood abuse to domestic violence. And so we spent all of last season talking about how we process trauma based on our main Enneagram type. And that series really helped a lot of people. But that was born out of a curiosity of a very difficult time in my life, whereby I had been in counseling, I'm still in counseling, but I knew that I needed more. And so I doubled down and I hired an Enneagram coach who happens to be one of yours. And so in true Enneagram style, I just want to thank you for the gift, the precious gift that is Carissa Harrison. She and I have been working together for a little over a year, and to say that the results of my work with her is life-changing is a vast understatement.
Absolutely. I mean, the Enneagram, as we all know that have been a part of the Enneagram, it is an amazing tool that brings astonishing clarity to what's going on inside us and why. But when you hire a certified Enneagram coach, the things that they can walk you through step by step is truly amazing. And so, yeah, I totally agree. And I'm so thankful that you reached out and got a coach to help you, just to go a little bit further and a little bit deeper so that real growth and transformation can take place.
Well, speaking of going deeper, we are going to talk today about your new book coming out September the 20th, More Than Your Number. And when I say that this read is a must read, and guys, listeners, when you get this book, and we are going to have the opportunity for one of you for it to land in your mailbox on September 20th. Stay tuned to my Instagram account for the way to do that. But this is a book that you're not going to want. I mean, get it on Audible. That's cool. But make sure you have the book and the highlighters and the pens and all the things. This book is called More Than Your Number. And so as I mentioned in my intro, you guys have written other books. I'm looking at some right behind you, the journals that I want to talk about towards the end of the episode. But what inspired you guys to write More Than Your Number?
Wow. I'm not sure if it was more inspiration or just biography. So in 2014, we moved to Nashville. I was taking on an executive pastor role, and just quickly got spun out in my relationship with the lead pastor. And after 13, 14 months, we were gone. We were out. And it was in that season of not having a job, trying to figure out what's going to be next, that I started meeting with a therapist to deal with my own recovery. Started attending recovery meetings as well, the adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families, ACA. And it was in that time that I started to recognize not only, and it was something that I learned in my training with Dan Allender around trauma. We use strength finders in that. And he was saying, like, these parts of you were what came about to help you cope with the trauma you were experiencing. But in God's economy, they're also the very gifts that you use to live out your sense of calling and purpose.
Yeah.
So I experience joy and shame all at the same time. Well, I start doing this work of naming these various parts of my heart that are in competition with one another. And then I start to share this with Beth, and Beth's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't.
As a good 9.
It's a good 9, not knowing your
What
inner
are you
world.
talking about? Like, I try to like see different parts within me, and 9s don't know ourselves to begin with, let alone, like how we have different facets within us, that are
Right.
competing.
I love that you guys named them. I love that. That's in the book. I love that you named
That's
them.
right. So what Beth did was one day it finally clicked for her, where she saw, oh, what the parts of me are: one, the beloved and wounded, these kind of core parts of our main type, the 2 wings and the 2 paths, or the 2 lines that go from each number. So it actually became a new way of looking at the Enneagram, rather than just one thing with all these other attributes, that I'm actually many things, which clarifies so much for everybody. Like, why is it that a 9 and a 2, why do they test the same? Or why does a 6 always think that they're either a 1 or a 2 and all these other numbers? Well, more than your number helps to explain why these other numbers show up and how we relate to ourselves and to our world. And so we just decided for this one, it was going to be a very personal and kind of our unique stamp on the Enneagram, was to provide this new perspective on how to approach and use the Enneagram to apply the gospel to our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would just say for me, as Jeff was going through that, his own understanding, and I could totally see what he was talking about. Like, yeah, I can see, like, he has a part called Buddy, and Buddy actually says, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, what about this? What about that? As a 6, I was like, yeah, I totally see that. But I was having a hard time seeing it for myself. And so Enneagram Internal Profile, or EIP, which is what we call it now, really just brought the clarity that I needed. So that's really where it started. And then when we started explaining it to other people, they were like, oh my gosh, this makes the Enneagram so much more accessible and easier to use. And I think you even said earlier, like, I thought I never used my type 1 wing. And then once you start to see how it can show up,
Right.
Especially in written form, you're like, oh my gosh, it's totally there. Maybe not as much as the 3. And some people it's the opposite, but at least it helps us to see what's going on, that there are competing parts within us, that part of me wants to do this and part of me wants to do that, or part of me feels this and part of me feels that. But there are these competing parts, in that the more we can see them and acknowledge them, the more we can actually and prayerfully self-coach these parts into health and wholeness. And that's really where the wounded child and the beloved child are so important. So in your main type, because your main type is still the primary force behind everything you do, but it's not the only part. But it has, whether it's misaligned wounded child, the wounded part of our heart, or the aligned beloved child, which is the part of ourselves that's spirit-led, knows who it is and whose it is. And that's the part we want to waken and to lead the rest of our parts into wholeness. And it can, if we're willing to actually go there.
Right. And that's it. Right. And we're going to go to aware in great depth in a minute. But as a trauma survivor, I tell my listeners all the time, we don't compare traumas. Trauma is trauma, right? And so when we look at it, I want to dig a little bit deeper in just a second, and the wounded child and the beloved child, because as a trauma survivor, I sobbed as I was reading those parts of the book, because so much of me was often on the left side of that page, which was the wounded child acting out of my woundedness, and then these competing selves, why, and the negative self-talk, and this is where Carissa has really helped me in my coaching, that finding compassion for those competing parts. And I could tell that somebody had been somewhere in counseling, because internal family systems was introduced in there a little bit, and that pairs nicely with this. And a lot of my listeners use internal family systems as their mode of counseling. This is an incredible piece of work. I want y'all to know that that's not just me being a 2 flattering you. It is incredible. But one of my favorite parts of the book was, you reference another favorite book of mine, A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23. And even as the
That's
words,
so fun.
even as the words come out of my mouth, I get chills because that book refers back to the truth of our good shepherd. What about that book was so precious to you that made it into this book?
I mean, it's the
Oh, that's Beth's go-to book.
Yeah.
Oh man, you love that book.
well, it literally is the heart of the beloved child within me. So whenever I get spun out, triggered, activated, whatever word you want to use, Jeff is, my best friend, my companion, the one that can help keep me grounded, but he can't give me what only Christ can give me.
Right.
And our wounded child gets so spun out, we forget who we are, and more importantly, whose we are. And all of a sudden, we're living alone. We're living as an orphan. We think we have to do it all on our own. No one's there to help us again.
Yeah.
And that's a lie, but it feels so real. And
Beth and I've even talked lately that when I notice that she's kind of living out of woundedness, the wounded part of her, that young part of Bethy's heart, doesn't even realize that I exist,
right,
that I'm here to help.
or at least Pastor Jeff.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. And so, but that even that also relates to our relationship with God. This is not something separate, but the same kind of attachment styles we bring to people, we also bring to God.
To God.
And so even that wounded part of you even has trouble believing that the shepherd really is loving and cares.
Yeah. Well, once you're in that place, in the wounded child place, what usually happens before you're able, and like internal family systems, you're absolutely right, is where we kind of got inspired for this, but it's kind of completely different. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I just want people to know, I want to shout out, because that's where Jeff started learning all this stuff. And the reason why I was struggling with it is just I don't operate quite in the same way.
You're an Enneagram coach, and so you adopted it.
And so I saw it through that lens. But all that to be said is, like, when the wounded child is activated, we're really living out whatever age that wounded part of our heart is being activated in. So whether it's a 5-year-old, a 13-year-old, 21-year-old, whatever part of our heart, and it really can only see and react in that way. Yep. And so the intro of the book, which is really what you're referring to, about A Shepherd's Look at Psalms 23 by Philip Keller, it is my primary way of grounding myself in truth. When all the lies are swirling around and they feel tangible, they feel real, I have to bring to myself some sort of awareness to get me out of it. Kind of like a record player with the, it's playing a soundtrack in a groove that's a false message, and it just keeps going and going. I have to have something that will jolt that needle out of that false groove and into a truth groove. And so you'll see in the book, so I hope everyone will go get the book, because in the book is the actual picture that I have on my phone. And that picture represents my beloved child, who I really am in Christ and where I'm at, which is in his arms. And when you see the picture, you'll see this peaceful, restful, secure demeanor on the face of a sheep in the arms of its good shepherd. And I have that on my phone because we're always forgetting how we are loved and cared for. And that brings me back to the truth that no matter how I'm acting, whether in healthy ways or unhealthy ways, no matter what I'm doing in sinful or unsinful ways, I am safe and secure in what he has done on my behalf, not what I'm doing. And when I recognize that, it allows my heart to calm down and to move in a new direction, a healthier direction. So that's why that book has been so impactful for me.
Well, Amy, I want to ask Beth a question, and you can do this briefly. You don't have to take it. But one of the unique insights about EIP is that we can also sequence these parts. So when Beth is Bethy, we call her Bethy, Beth's wounded part is activated. What other parts of your Enneagram type, wings and paths, what order do they show up in? But we'll do it in like a minute.
That's a great question. So you're a 9. Yeah, for listeners, she's a 9. So yes. That's a fantastic question.
So little Bethy, and here's the other thing I want to say before we jump into this. So our connecting types, your wings and your lines, are going to either follow the lead of the wounded child or the beloved child. And this can shift instantly. Like if my heart all of a sudden gets grounded back into the beloved child, these parts of our hearts are going to follow the lead of the beloved. But when we get spun out, it's going to also follow into the less healthy patterns. And the reason why I want to say that is because so often what we normally do is we shame ourselves, we condemn ourselves,
we have contempt towards these parts.
And we're trying to get rid of them, be critical of them, like somehow that's going to work. But that's actually the opposite. And that's where IFS really helped us to learn, no, we want to befriend these parts. We want to welcome these parts. It doesn't mean we agree with what they're doing.
Right.
But just like you would a little child who's spun out, you come alongside, you listen, you attune to them, and then you bring direction and guidance and provision for them. So that's what we want to do with these parts. So when my little Bethy, the type 9 part, is spun out, usually it's because I'm afraid of conflict and tension. Maybe I've gotten overlooked somehow. I feel like I don't matter. What usually happens is my type 6 part shows up, and I call her Worrying Wendy. And she's trying to help little Bethy think of all the worst case scenarios to lose connection with people, because that's what Bethy wants. So again, my type 9 is in the lead, but these other parts are going to assist. So, okay, little Bethy, if you go against what Jeff says, maybe he'll get upset. So let's just go along to get along. Or, well, if you go this direction, this might happen. So she's trying to navigate relationships to keep the peace. But she's a 6, but she's operating out of the direction of the type 9. Now, the type 3 then shows up. I call her, when she's misaligned, not good enough Natalie. And Natalie's like, you're not doing it good enough. You're not successful. No one's going to admire you. They don't even know your value. Like, what are you worth here? So she's kind of shaming me and putting me down in those ways. But then Victoria, vicious Victoria, my type 1 part, will come in, and she is like, you're a bad wife, or you're a bad mom. It's much more of a ethical, moral perspective, and it's very harsh and critical. And when that all happens, I'm really getting spun out to the point where I'm not even thinking straight. The fog is really thick. But then my 8 part shows up because she's had enough. Like, she's watched all this mayhem happen, and she is like, all right, everyone get out of the way. So she plows over Wendy and Natalie and Victoria, and then she comes outward. And that's
and
what
Pastor
Jeff usually...
Yeah.
Usually Jeff only experiences.
See, that's the amazing thing
Raging
about this,
Regina.
is that I can start to see some of it happen, but what presents to me is the 8 part of Beth's Enneagram type. And so then that's when I know, like, there's been a whole other sequence of events that have happened.
Didn't know that before,
but I didn't hear. Oh no! And now we have language.
Yeah. So all he would see early on was Raging Regina show up and be very kind of persistent and stubborn, and kind of plowing over him or the kids to get what she, to protect little Bethy, because that's what 8s do. 8s are the passionate protectors.
Yeah.
So they all have good intent, but if they're misaligned with the wounded child, they're going to do it in ways that actually creates more harm than actually help. So that's where we need to be aware of how these parts are affecting us. And like we talk about it being like a rumble strip on the highway. So when my heart gets misaligned, I can start to see inside me, like, oh, Wendy's starting to get like anxious and like thinking of all the things, and that anxiety is coming out towards the family, and they can start to sense it. And then once they push back a little bit, they don't know that this is going on. That's when Natalie comes online, and Victoria, like, see, you're not even doing this right. How dare you? But then what they see next is Raging Regina. And yet all that other stuff is going on. So if I can be aware of the dynamics that are happening inside me, I can start to ask for help, let them know what's going on. Like, hey, I'm really nervous because we might be late, or, we might not have all the equipment or materials we need for such and such a meeting. So whatever is going on inside me, I can now say it as I'm starting to feel the anxiety, starting to feel the misalignment, versus allowing it to just derail and fall into the same common pitfall. So now that is the best case scenario, is that you see it before it happens. But even if it's happening, sometimes Jeff will say to me, hey, who am I talking to right now? Yeah. And then I'll be honest, some of my parts are like, oh no, he's caught us,
Yeah.
And
there's like a really fun TikTok of like somebody's walked in the door and everybody's caught.
Yeah.
We totally should do. Y'all totally should do that on TikTok. That would be amazing.
Yeah, that would be actually good. But so there's, but then the parts are like, oh, wait, he actually is calling me out because he cares, not to shame and not to hurt. And so that's where we can then have more honest conversations.
I love the fact that you just said the word, he's calling me out versus, oh, he's attuning to us.
Mm.
Yeah.
One is way more compassionate, but oftentimes your parts, your team feel my presence.
When they're misaligned, they think they're in trouble.
Yeah.
But what you're trying to do is attune. And once they can see that it's attunement, not calling me out or getting me in trouble, then they can calm down and move. We can move towards one another. Right. And that's why this is so important, because really, ultimately, they're all of these parts are trying to attune to little Bethy. She's so afraid to be alone again, to not matter, to have conflict in relationship. And that's where Coach Beth, the beloved part of my heart, needs to awaken and come back and get really to the driver's seat of this bus of all of these kiddos.
I loved that analogy in the book.
Yeah, and to lead the parts. And when she's at the helm, she knows, like the beginning of the book with the little sheep, that she is beloved. She is safe and secure. She has all that she needs in Christ and what God has provided. Jeff can never come through for me fully. Other people can't. I can't come through for myself fully, but it's already been taken care of. And so what I need to do is rest and depend solely on what's already been accomplished. And it's at that place then my heart gets more free, my head is more clear, and I can move in a direction that all my parts can be like, oh, wait, there's actually healthier ways for Wendy, because I need Wendy, my type 6 part, to let me know what's going on. And she's really the warrior. She has the courage to go through hard things. My type 3 part, Natalie, she is remarkable in saying, hey, let's make this more efficient. Here's what we need to do to get things accomplished. And my 1 is very principled, keeps me grounded. And then my type 8, she really does give me the confidence and the courage and the strength and the tenacity to plow a path for others, kind of like your Enneagram coach and having coaches like your coach to allow them to flourish in the way that they should, the way that God has called them. And that's all based on supporting the type 9, the way God has created me to be. Right. And they are there to support, but hopefully we're going to do it in that beloved way versus the wounded way.
And I love the way that David describes it in the Psalms, where he says that I've learned to quiet my soul, that all of this noise is happening. And it could be like we talk in the book about all of these parts on a bus and who's driving the bus. I think of it, I was an athlete and through college. And so I typically think of it in terms of a team. IFS thinks of it in terms of a family. Whatever metaphor helps to capture what's happening inside of you. But the possibility is that through the work of Christ and now applied by His Spirit, gives me the resources needed to learn how to quiet my soul, to learn how to apply the truth of the gospel, not just to me as a singular, but me as a multiple of what part of me needs to hear the truth and what truth is it that they need to hear. Because as Beth mentioned, her 6 part or 3 might need to hear something different that would really be encouraging to that part of her heart rather than just one blanket statement. Because, I mean, even I think it's Mark 8 or 9, where a father says, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. He was both and.
Right.
And aren't we all?
Yes. Yeah. It's so true.
David in Psalms 42, why are you downcast, O my soul?
My soul.
Put your hope in God. So there's part of his heart that's hopeful and like, hey, put your hope in God. He could see the hope before him, but there's that other part of him that's downcast. So he's demonstrating how we can navigate our own heart when it is conflicted inside. And I think that's so helpful, because as a 9, there's a part of me that just wants to shut down, withdraw, but then that 8 part of my heart wants to be really strong and tenacious and like get everyone out of my way. And those are very different parts, and they're happening at the same time. I'm sorry,
and for me, the 2 part just wants to save the world. Like, I don't want to
Yes.
deal with, I don't want to,
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with my 3 or my 1 or my 4. I go directly to 8, which is, I'm not proud of, because so I think you guys used one of my favorite scriptures. It's actually my birthday verse, which is just, it was actually, the birthday verse was actually a concept introduced to me in one of the darkest times of my life. So you take your birth month and your birthday and you pick a birthday verse, and mine is Romans 12:1. And so send me a birthday present on December 1st. No, I'm just kidding. But that verse talks about, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is a reasonable service. But we forget that second verse. We do this by the renewing of our minds. And so how can we do this? How can we create this Enneagram internal profile? In my mind, it's this: we are aligned with the gospel, because we're either misaligned with the truth of the completed work of what Jesus did for us on the cross, and we think we need to save ourselves. If we're aligned with the gospel, operating out of that beloved childness, climbing up in the shepherd's lap, knowing that he will leave the 99 to find the one, hearing his heartbeat, then we can understand all of what we're going to talk about, because we're using words like IFS. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, that's internal family systems. And we are going to, as we dive deeper into what this book is about, More Than Your Number is about what Jeff and Beth have created, the Enneagram internal profile. And you just heard Beth walk through it beautifully as a 9. And if you're okay, Jeff, I would love you to walk through it as a 6. And that question is a little bit selfish, because I do life very closely with a 6. But I would love to know what that journey is like for you, as she just outlined for us.
Well, it's really interesting as I think through my own profile. And so I'm a 6, and so I've 5 and 7 are the 2 wings, and then 3 and 9 are the 2 paths. And so similar to Beth, I've named these parts and have even written the stories out of the stories for each of these parts. When I first experienced them as a child, how they were a help to me as a child, and how they were a burden to me as a child. But if you really want to blow people's mind, my parts have relationships with her parts. So when Regina shows up, and although it's not connected, but we are part of all 9, there's parts of all 9 types in us. We call my 8-part Reggie. So when Regina comes out, Reggie comes out. and it really gets big and saucy.
I bet it's interesting. Yeah. So as a 2, doing life very closely with a 6, like I don't. This is a very, very good friend of mine, actually my roommate, and she's the person that, we go to movie theaters, she knows where the exit signs are, and I'll go to her with an idea, and she will find everything wrong with it, and it drives me insane. But understanding that. And so, one of the questions that I was going to ask you is pretty rudimentary and maybe a step back, because we're so comfortable with each other. We've jumped ahead a little bit, but I do want you, I am interested in the listeners understanding, like we just kind of walked through it, but why is it so important and to identify the strategy that is so well outlined in this book? Cannot stress enough, buy the hard copy so you can write in it. Why is it so important to first identify? Like, I knew my stress path was an 8, my growth path was a 4. I tend to wing stronger to the 3, and like I said, I would have said there's not an ounce of 1 in me. All of my status updates are wrong. I don't have any attention to detail. I don't worry about being bad. But as I was reading this book, I thought, ooh, there are times when that 1 shows up, and I need a strategy to understand that. And I want to do it as a beloved aligned. I want that strategy. So we kind of just went through it, but why is it so important? Why is this so important to create this strategy? Because I walk around going, I'm a 2. That's my being, that's just my being 2-ness. And it gives me a lot of freedom to say, I'm sorry, I can't be a 1, or I'm not like you, and so I branded myself as a 2. And you guys really called me out. Speaking of calling me out in this book, you got there is an importance of the strategy of that. And so, can you expound on that a little bit more as this book teaches listeners and readers to do what Beth just outlined, to go to your parts? Could you help us understand why it's important to create your own Enneagram internal profile?
Well, there's a phrase that I've learned in recovery that I've really appreciated, that was, I started to notice how the principle shows up, particularly those who are interested in Enneagram. And the phrase is this: discovery is not recovery. Descriptions are not transformation. Meaning, oftentimes, the Enneagram, when presented and embraced, gives us vocabulary to explain who we are. Like, oh, that's why I do that. Or you hear it a lot in relationships. Oh, now I see you. I understand why you struggle in this way. The vocabulary and the descriptions are so helpful.
But that doesn't mean anything changes.
But nothing changes. It just means that we can name what has happened. I mean, I've gone through the 12 steps a couple of times now. And man, it's one thing to do steps. They say 3 steps and you're out, because you do the first 3 steps of naming the harm that was done. And then the 4th step is starting to identify the coping mechanisms that are getting in the way of adulthood relationships. And that's a really hard turn. Well, the reason why this work is so important is that the Enneagram actually gives us a map of understanding all of the God-given resources that we have to live out our sense of calling. So not only are we dealing with how we are relating to the world in an unhealthy way from these parts, but we also, by not addressing it, fail to recognize the gifts that we have to be able to live out our sense of calling. So it's a profoundly spiritual exercise to actually believe that what God has said is true, apply that to our hearts, that we can experience the transformation that you alluded to earlier in Romans 12, 1 and 2. Yeah. That by yielding ourselves to understand, okay, who am I? How am I engaging with the world? Actually becomes a very opportunity for us to apply the mercies that we have received in order to live freely in our sense of calling, and as his children now exercising our calling within his kingdom.
Well, and also we say in all of our materials, do not use the Enneagram as a sword or as a shield. And I think that's just so, and it's a sword against others. It's a sword against ourselves, like, oh, well, like you said, like, I can't, like, for instance, I mean, if I took probably what everyone typically thinks of a 9, then I would never be an entrepreneur and start your Enneagram Coach. People would think, oh, well, a 9 can't be an entrepreneur. A 9 can't lead
I was shocked when I read that you were a 9. Absolutely shocked. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so what that means is, 1, I am more than one thing. But also we can do hard things, like not just the 9, but all the types. All the types have hard things that they have to overcome. And that's really why we love watching movies, right? Because they overcome difficulties and challenges, and you get to watch them thrive in the way that God has designed them. And so the gospel is about transformation.
Yeah.
And if we were to say, like, the shield mentality, well, I'm a 9, I can't do it, so I guess you all are just going to have to do it for me. Like that is, God has called me to be more like him.
Well, I mean, in some ways, that's what you're doing. As I was learning about all this, you're like, well, that's Jeff, that's not me.
Yeah, actually, because I was like, here, I'll have Jeff lead. I'll have Jeff speak in front of people because he was the pastor, and that's not what God was actually calling me. Now we do tag team a lot, but really, your Enneagram Coach, actually, the business name is Beth McCord and Company LLC, because we knew that my tendency was to overlook myself and allow everyone else to overlook me.
I mean, but just think about that. So as just an application of why we want to learn more about the Enneagram in this way, here's Beth with a body of knowledge that she has meditated on, worked with, applied with the people for over a decade. And we're at a point, we're spun out in 2015. She's going to start this thing, and we name it Beth McCord and Company, but doing business as your Enneagram Coach. It's because of the insight of knowing who she is as a 9 and the temptations she would face that we memorialized this act of faith to name something, which is a very biblical thing. I mean, the Bible's always naming stuff,
yeah,
but we named it So, and then we both were able to partner together to fight for it as your Enneagram coach has continued to grow.
Well, and if you think about like driving like that bus, right? If your axle is out of alignment and is always going to pull you towards the ditch, well, until we're in heaven, it's never going to be fully aligned and where it needs to be to stay on the path in a very healthy way. So as a 9, I know that my alignment is always a little bit off. And if I'm not paying attention, I will just be like, here, everyone else, just take the business, go for it, do whatever you want. I don't care. Like, and I lose myself and I lose the voice that God has called me to. And that's just the nature of the 9, but that doesn't mean that it's good or okay. That's not what God has called me to. So I have to do hard things. And part of that is driving that bus and being attuned and aware that it will naturally pull to the right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what does that mean? Well, that means I have to have my hands on the wheel all the time and be aware to keep it steady, to keep it on that path. And that's hard work. And frankly, as a 9, we just want to chill.
You don't like work.
Yeah. I mean, we do like work. Here's what's so funny is that when I'm in my beloved space, I am an extremely hard worker. I am getting so much work done and I'm flourishing, but that wounded part of my heart wants to chill and relax to the point where I lose myself. So when we start to do these hard things and awaken to these tendencies we have, we can see that it's actually not what we want. We think we want it. That's the wounded self. That these are the strategies we've had growing up to quote unquote survive.
Yeah.
But it's actually not what's liberating, freeing, and enjoying.
Right.
It's when we do the hard things that we find joy and freedom in the ways that we were created to be.
Right. And so, yeah. And I love one of the analogies that you guys use in the book, because we do want to make sure that we make clear that you always are your main number. So I'm always a 2, you're always a 9, Jeff's always a 6. But not all 2s look the same. And I love the analogy in the book that you use with the Sherwin-Williams paint. Like I walk into Lowe's or somewhere and look at that and have a full-on panic attack. I'm like, I just want blue. That's all I want is blue.
Sure.
But so what this work does in this book, you talk about doing hard things. Guys, don't buy the book if you don't want to do hard things, because this is going to take you places to growth and challenge you to remember that you are only whole in the completed work of Jesus Christ on the cross, who made you. And when he made you, he said, you know what? We don't have one quite like this. And so, yes, I'm an Enneagram 2, and Beth, you're an Enneagram 9, and Jeff, you're a 6, but we're all different colors, and we have access to these other parts of us that turns this transformation. It takes us from observation of that, right? Like we could read this book and go, oh, that's a good book, and put it on our shelf and never do anything about it. I'm still a 2. I'm going to remember my core fears, being unwanted and unloved. And when I start to pick a fight, it's probably because I'm feeling unwanted or unloved. I was abandoned as a child. And so I'll be in a grocery store with a friend, having the car key in my hand, and lose my friend in the store, and we'll have a full-on panic attack. And you talking about going off the rails. And so my encouragement to listeners, and I know this is your encouragement in this writing, is there is a difference between observation of this truth that we have access to all these different parts of us, and doing the hard work that transforms us into the best that we can be, so that we can advance the kingdom of God through the way he made us. I call it our Psalm 139-ness. But my listeners are all wounded, most of them, or they love people who are. Everybody's wounded. But I have a lot of PTSD patients. I'm a complex PTSD patient. Lots of people hang on to these truths. And I want them to know that there is hope, because there are such great things about 8s and I know my path by heart, that I had, I would have said I don't have any access to my 4, yet I placed second in a writing contest in Writer's Digest. I have a podcast. And I'm like, wait, I'm not just a helper. I'm not just And so guys, when you buy this book, don't just observe it, lean into it. It's very clear about what your paths are. It's not confusing. It sounds confusing when you're listening to it on a podcast, but it is not confusing. And so you guys write a lot about the difference between observation and transformation. And I think that's really important to
And
highlight.
also, like you were saying, yes, like just talking about it right now, people haven't read the book or dove into a little bit more. It can sound maybe a little confusing, but what's really cool in the back half of the book, it is a cheat sheet for all 9 types. So we clearly lay out your Enneagram internal profile for you, and they're bullet points, so it's real short, sweet. Like you can just see it all with clarity. And there's actually even one page that has all of it summarized. And that is really where a lot of the gold is, because you're going to keep coming back to that part of the book, whether it's for yourself or if your spouse or your kid, you're like, I wonder what could be going on with them. And then just being able to read that and observe that and ask clarifying questions is going to be so helpful.
And you give us a gospel prayer for each.
Yeah.
Which is now printed and on my wall.
That's awesome.
So, I got the PDF version of it. So I've not seen that picture. I can't wait to see that picture. But yeah, you give us a gospel prayer, because I just think, I'm so passionate that people understand that no matter what you've been through, that we can heal from the completed work on the cross. To your point, Beth, we are never going to be whole until we see Jesus, but we can lean into this. You guys developed a greater way to do this. And I love this too, also printed and now on my wall. And there's this reference of being aware. And this is something that Carissa has worked with me a lot. Like, she's taught me to be curious, like, where are you feeling this in your body and what are you doing? And just this concept of being awareness. But you guys made this fantastic acronym of being aware of the strip on the side of the road, so that we can come back to the back of the book and go, how can I find my which one is showing up here? I have not yet named mine yet. I'm terrified to do that. Which one is showing up here? Am I operating out of beloved? And it's difficult for me, having been abandoned by my own flesh and blood, to operate in a beloved as a beloved child. I've operated most of my life as a wounded child, leaning into that 3, accessing the performance part of the 3 to get through life. And it has served me very well until it didn't. And I ended up, in a psychiatric hospital for 5 days. And that was about 15 years ago. But what the Enneagram has done for me is it's helped me understand that my core fear and my core motivations are my number, but I have access to these other things. And so I would love for you guys to tell us a little bit about that acronym AWARE. And again, I'm stress again, buy the hard copy of the book.
That's great.
But talk to us a little bit about that, because I love it so much. I have it right here, but I want to hear it from you.
Well, I mean, and this, you brought up an interesting point that I want to go back to, and then I'll walk through AWARE and this as a helpful tool, whether it be a moment by moment thing or a spiritual exercise to do daily. But you mentioned that you were terrified to name a part.
Yeah.
What is it that scares you about it? Because when you read the book, everybody's going to experience that.
Yeah, I cried when I read the part of the book where Beth names the little Bethy. Because I recently have gotten some pictures of me as a child, which weren't around before, and did some inner child work in my counselor's office. Yeah. And so I've always been really afraid to go back to the wounded child, which for me, my earliest memory was about 3 or 4 years old. And so, but listeners, hear me. Y'all know me. I'm willing to go to the hard places. And this is the work that I've done with Carissa. But I'm scared of what I don't know. Right. But I also know in my head that that's going to push me to the one that can carry me, that I can crawl up in that good shepherd's lap and hear his heartbeat. And he said, and hear him say, I left the 99 to find you, Amy. And so I did call my wounded child, the toe-headed monster slayer. And, but I haven't named anything else. And the reason why I'm scared is because I don't want to be aware of how healthy I can be when I'm operating in my beloved aligned state. You know why I don't want to be, why? In full honesty, because one day I'm going to stand before God and be responsible for what I know. And when I know that I can live a life full and free because of the completed work of Jesus on the cross, but yet I choose to live in my wounded child state because I'm too afraid of the pain that's going to come with naming those parts, then I am not honoring the unbelievable thing that Jesus did for us on the cross. He didn't do us a favor. He gave his life. He spilt his blood. That earth was changed by the blood spilt on that hill. And so that's why I'm afraid to go back. But I am. Yesterday, I had an appointment with my counselor, and we talked about this. And and I've often named little Amy the toe-headed monster slayer. And so that wounded child, I have named that the wounded two. The wounded two is the toe-headed monster slayer.
Well,
but it makes
what
you
comes to mind,
look, you know.
Yeah, what comes to mind for me hearing you share that is when Jesus tells the apostles, let the little children come to me. What would it look like? And this is what the aware exercise is about.
Yeah.
What would it look like for adult Amy to go to this little 3-4-year-old girl and bring her to Jesus?
Yeah.
And because she's terrified that what is Jesus going to think?
Well, I mean, honestly, it's probably little Amy is a fearing rejection. That's like the core of the two.
Yeah.
Which happened,
and what,
you know, it absolutely,
Right.
sure.
Yeah. There's good reason for her to be afraid.
Right.
I mean, not because of Jesus, but because of your experience.
Right.
And this is what aware is about. So the acrostic aware. First is to awaken to what you're experiencing in the moment. So for 6, oftentimes it shows up in what am I ruminating over? I could be a decision that I need to make. I'm just ceaselessly thinking about it. Beth laughs at me like, what have you been thinking about over the last 5 minutes? And I'll rattle off 50 different things.
A legal pad page.
All that. Yes. It could show up in your body. It could show up in your breathing, pain. There's a particular pain in my back that I experience whenever I start to get really anxious. So it's just awakening to I'm experiencing something in the moment. Number 2 is to welcome. And just like I mentioned about Jesus welcoming the little children, we adopt a posture that you are welcome. All of you is welcome. If you think about the book of Psalms, the way that C.S. Lewis describes the book, it's man's heart on display before God. So it's the anatomy of the soul, but it's all permitted to be present with Jesus. And so we can welcome these parts versus showing contempt, overlooking, denying that they exist, because that actually makes greater problems. If you can imagine like a little child throwing a tantrum, when a parent finally attunes to them, it helps them to organize these big emotions. They actually calm down, versus if they become more permissive, the child may continue to act out until they're attuned to. So awaken and welcome. The next is ask. We invite the Spirit whom Jesus told us is going to be with us and is going to remind us of all the things that Christ has taught us. That the Spirit, we invite the Spirit to say, okay, Psalm 139, as you mentioned earlier, is search me and know me, see if there's any unholy way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. This idea that the Spirit wants to participate, it wants to join us in our process. And so we ask God, what's happening inside of me? We ask ourselves, what am I thinking about? What am I scared of? What am I fearful of?
What's the truth?
And then what is the truth? And the next part is to receive the truth, to embrace the truth, to invite the gospel, or to apply the truth of the gospel to the various parts of our heart. Who needs to hear from Jesus today? Mm-hmm. And it could be for me, my 5 part, I call him Bob. Bob is a real person, and he's been a mentor for many, many years, but he really taught me how to read as a pastor. And so my library blossomed to like 3,000 volumes. And at times that was anxiously reading, and at other times it's made me the man who I am today. And so what does Bob need to hear that he's searching for in books? What does he need to hear from Jesus in this moment? Yeah. And then lastly is to engage, knowing this to be true. And I love this in the scriptures of this formula that moves from the indicative to the imperative. The Bible tells us about who we are and what Jesus has done first before it tells us to do something. Yeah. So because we have been loved, we are to love. Because we have received compassion, we extend compassion to other people. And so we re-engage with God, we re-engage with others. So it's awaken, welcome, ask, receive, and engage. And the way it started was that was just our way of, I call them team meetings in the mornings. And it was just a way of me accounting for all that was happening and being able to identify it so I don't act out of something in that day. Now, I don't always do it. And sometimes I do it just in the moment, like where we catch ourselves and okay, well, what just happened there? Okay, I'm going to be kind and welcoming. And I'm just going to ask for some help to be able to understand, because I don't always have clarity.
Yeah. And I think a lot of my listeners, because I know this is true of me, and I know ones probably have the loudest inner critic, but twos probably are close behind. So when I get activated or something's going on, before I read this book has been life-changing for me. This podcast is a cherry on top. Before I read this book, I would indict myself, because I would say, wait, your core fear is being unwanted and loved, and you're not either of those right now. And even if I was able to go to God loves me so much, Carissa sent me early on in our work the song Jireh by Maverick City, and the first part of that song says, I wasn't propping you up so I can never let you down. And so I'm operating on, I'm a 2, I'm wanted and I'm loved, but I am not okay. Why am I not okay? Then I get this PDF on my computer and I read it in 48 hours and I'm like, oh, the 8 needs something. The 1 needs something. The 4 needs something. Okay, what do I do now? Okay, let's welcome it and not indict it. In my generation, our generation, we're not taught to be compassionate to ourselves. We grind. We were taught to crawl in sick, not call in sick. And so this idea of awaken and taking this time I love that, Jeff, the team meeting. So my 1, 2, 3, 4, and 8 team meeting is going to happen every day. But this book has been life-changing to me, and I think it will be to my listeners as we walk into a season of where I'm going to be interviewing trauma survivors who have navigated the waters of forgiveness. And why do we forgive? And do I forgive easily because I want to be wanted and loved, or do I forgive because I'm commanded to forgive? And I think when I understand now the Enneagram internal profile, which we will be using all season. So I say again, go buy the book because I'll be referring to it, because I think it's an incredible book as we walk through a very difficult topic of, and season 4 is called Forgiving Trauma Makers. And you guys are the episode right before the season premiere. And so I want to express my immense gratitude for your time here today. The book is amazing. I am grateful to have gotten the opportunity to read it. I have already ordered it. And I say again to my to listeners, check me out on Instagram. If you're not following me, click on that link that says Contact Amy. With that being said, I also want to highlight a few things about Jeff and Beth. They have written a couple books, one of which I listened to this morning, your episode with Amber Colum, and I referred to that earlier in the introduction about the Enneagram and marriage. So I highly suggest those of you who are married go get that. I know Amber very well. I know that book has been game-changing for her. But right behind you, I see what I believe to be the journals for each Enneagram type. And so I would love for you to tell us a little bit about those journals and where people can find them.
Yeah, well, they can be found at any bookstore, online, even at Barnes and Nobles. If you walk in there, they're there. Sometimes not all of them are there. Sometimes they've been snagged, by someone. But so there are 9 different journals. They're 21-day journeys really through each type. So type 1s have a book, type 8s have a book, etc. And what's so great about the book is I'm really laying out the foundations of any Enneagram type for them to understand themselves and why they do what they do, but also how to transform and how to have growth and how to believe in the truth of the gospel and apply it to your life. But what's great about it is you can do it by yourself. You get your own book and go through each, 21 days, whether you do it fast or slow, or you can do it with another person or a group. Because every day has the same topic and some common content, but it also has type-specific content.
Right.
So Amy, you and I and Jeff, we could be reading our books and each day go, hey, let's talk about, whatever day, let's say day 11 on wings. tell me about your wings. What did you learn about yourself? And then we could share about the same topic, but we'd obviously see that we're different. And how can we, one, better understand ourselves by sharing with another person, but also how can they learn more about us as we share about ourselves? And so they're really short, like a page and a half each day. So it's not very long. There's room to write, though. If you love to journal, you might want to get out another journaling pad, for more. But they're great, either gifts, stocking stuffers. They're great for Bible study groups, marriage groups.
And they will pair nicely with this book, right? So as all of our
Yes.
listeners and our readers create their own Enneagram internal profile, I ordered earlier today. I never could find mine in Barnes & Noble. Apparently there are a bunch of 2s in the world.
Yes.
But so I ordered all 9 for a lot of reasons, but I want to go through the 1. I want to go through the 2.
Oh, that's
I
fun.
want to go through the 3. I want to go through the 4, and I want to go through the 8. And for those 2s of you listening out there, those are my that's my team that we're talking about when we talk about creating an internal Enneagram internal profile. So I think that the journals pair nicely with this beautiful book called More Than Your Number.
They're rainbow colors. So if you love to have a little rainbow on your bookshelf, you'll have all 9 right there.
YouTube listeners are seeing that behind us. Yeah, they're rainbow colors. And I think that it would pair nicely especially my listeners who really come to this podcast for healing messages of the completed work of Jesus on the cross. And so when we talk about accessing these other parts with compassion, and we talk about the acronym AWARE, awaking to the thoughts and feelings and the body sensations and inclinations, asking those internal parts questions. What do you need today? Toe-headed Amy.
Mm-hmm.
And then welcoming what you need is just a nap, frankly,
right.
and not judging and not judging that. Asking the Holy Spirit to guide me so that I can be a better steward of the healing that He's given me. And my listeners often know that is my main goal in life, is to be a good steward of the healing that He has given me, and to live out Joel 2:25. And there's this book has just given me so much more of a resource to be able to do that and receive the truth that I am both wanted and loved by the Most High God, and then engage with those other parts of myself in what Jeff calls team meetings. I'm forever going to call it now. That is fantastic.
That's awesome.
So those of you, I will put all of that information in the show notes. These guys also have their own podcast. Beth is Your Enneagram Coach on Instagram. Jeff, I wrote yours down. It's not easy to remember. It's Rev Jeff.
That's funny. Yeah, actually, just go to Your Enneagram Coach.
just go to Your Enneagram Coach.
That's the you don't need to. I rarely post all the content that we put on the Enneagrams at Your Enneagram Coach, but yeah, it's Reverend Hefe. I was adopted into the McCord family, but when I was 30, I found out I was Mexican, and so as a pastor, and typically an executive pastor, Jefe means boss in Spanish. So
gotcha.
Plus it's close to Jeff. So Reverend Jefe was the.
Yeah. I looked it up this morning and I was like, how in the world am I going to say that? Like, I don't even know what that means. So follow Your Enneagram Coach on Instagram.
Yes, that's right.
Beth is one of 3 people that I actually have notifications that'll pop up and I say, Your Enneagram Coach just posted something. Awesome. And so know that what you're doing everywhere, whether it's this book, whether it's books that you've written, whether it's your podcast, you are making the difference in the lives of people. When I tell you that the series that we did on the Enneagram and trauma were so well listened to, and people just getting these like I did when in my work with Carissa, saying, oh, my core fear was met from a very young age. And all of a sudden, all this self-compassion came. It's like, well, and then 2 words came after that. From when it came time to analyzing my behavior, well, of course.
Yes.
And so I think that's deeper now that I have 5 more parts that I can check in with. And so, guys, go buy the book. I will be giving out a free copy that will land in your mailbox September 20th. Have they changed that date, or is that the date that it comes out still?
Nope, that's the date.
September 20th comes out. It's a beautiful cover, rainbow colors, and well written by both Jeff and Beth. Thank you guys for being here today. Do you have any other parting words for our listeners?
No, we're excited for people to dive in. They're going to get the clarity they need, but more importantly, the transformation that they're looking for. And that really comes through Jesus Christ. So we know that the book is going to do a lot for many people.
And I'll say this, Amy, and just as an encouragement to you, thinking of EIP, not only have you created something that's super helpful for people, but you did it in a season that may have been very difficult. I think you alluded to it, launching it during the pandemic. It's very 8-ish, and then you do it really well. It's very 3-ish. And so you brought and even the 4 of bringing beauty to a very dark dark memory or space for people. You have shown up and you are shining. So thank you for just believing the truth and living out your calling, because it matters to so many people. And thank you for the privilege of being on your show and letting us share about our book.
Well, thank you so much. And it has been a joy. The book is game changing. And so I know that my listeners will go out and get it. Well, guys, I do not get behind. I do not leave a microphone. I do not leave a keyboard without saying the same thing. And so I declare it over you, Jeff McCord, and you, Beth McCord, and my listeners. You hear it every time. You are seen, you are known, you are heard, you are loved, and you are valued. We will see you back here in 2 weeks with the season premiere of Wednesdays with Watson, Forgiving Trauma Makers. This book will be foundational all season, so go buy it. See you guys in 2 weeks.